Thinking Basketball Podcast. My name is Ben. Welcome back to another episode. We got a simple task today, which is to discuss the best players in the National Basketball Association on the offensive side of the ball only. I mean, there will be no strong opinions. It's a very easy ranking task. We're going to go through it in a nice, simple serial matter, one after the other. It will be linear and very easy to follow. We will not zigzag or get lost in tangents at all. It will be a very short 45 to 55-minute brisk podcast. We'll be arriving at a balmy 68 degrees when we get there. Cody, how you doing?
I could use a balmy 68 degrees. It was actually like in the 60s yesterday, which was like 5 days earlier. We had this huge blizzard, got like 6 inches of snow and whatever else. And then all of a sudden it flipped around. So we're in that magical time of year. Minnesota secretly has another season between winter and spring. And it needs its own name because it's neither of them, but it's also touching in both of them. Like you can expect the weather from either one, but you also can't be like spring prepared. It's its own fifth season, Ben.
That sounds like springter to me. Is that fair?
I kind of like that, but I just want to make them an entire new word. Like it's time to stop jamming things together and just making those the nickname. Like it's like the T-Macifying of nicknames. Like we need an actual just new name. Like
like you're onto something.
Trank.
Yeah.
That's not the actual name. That's just the first word that came to mind.
Well, I'm sure there's some etymology of like a Romance language or something that produced the 4 seasons. So maybe you could go get like a 5th season word from France or France. I don't know what French would be the language. France. Do you speak France? Good. Okay. So basketball players, this came up because I think a couple weeks ago or something, we were talking about where certain players are looking as offensive players right now. And the feedback from the fans was that we have to do an entire episode. We did one a couple of years ago on the top 10 offensive players in the league. I don't know if this is actually going to be a top 10 offensive players in the league. Maybe at the end we'll attempt to do that. But I was going through this process and like, to me, the thing that really jumped out, once you get close together, you know, it's like splitting. You're like, okay, that could be like the 7th or the 18th best offensive player. I'm not quite sure because there's so many guys right now who are so skilled, so diverse, putting up big numbers. Like the talent in the league is incredible, and people seem to be very close together when you're not talking about like the top 2 or 3 offensive players. So that was the first thing that jumped out to me. And the second thing that jumped out to me, which I hope we get to talk about today, is Cody, it feels like now more than ever, understanding and parsing the difference between like the best lone star player on the court, if I put a defensive roster around him, versus the best number 1 option on a team where maybe there's a little bit of offensive talent versus the best number 1 offensive option on a team with a ton of offensive talent and perfect fit, like, or being the second best option on a team. Like all these different things kept coming into play as I was trying to split hairs amongst these players. And that's kind of where my mind is at today.
I think what actually caused me to really go back and rethink my process was when I actually started to rank them a little bit. Because I'll say, like, I have 4 guys at the top, and I feel pretty confident they're probably going to be my top 4. But who knows? After talking with you, I might have to throw them all up in the air. But then there's like 6 or 7 guys right after that I think any combination of them, quite literally any combination of those 7, if you submitted them to me as a top 10 with like solid reasoning, I would agree equally with every single one. I don't even know what I feel right now with that reasoning. So I just kind of went through and I started throwing in like, what is the case for this person being included in the top 10? What is the case for this player being included here? Because there's so many different contexts. Like you said, like, I'd rather this team on like a mediocre type of team. I'd rather this guy next to this guy, but I wouldn't like him as much here. There's so many things like that makes it so much more difficult that, yeah, I think you and I are probably just going to bounce around some names. Maybe we'll land on some kind of, maybe a list, because I think the people require lists nowadays, Ben. I think lists are atop the menu today, Benjamin, and we'll see if we're able to cook it up and serve it like that burger at the end of the menu.
There's a lot of lists that are going around. Do you have a top 10 list of the lists? Is that something that you keep track of?
That's actually a great idea. I would love to know who the best list maker is right now. And here's the other thing right now, Ben.
List maker.
Is the best list the one that's the most provocative? or the one that agrees with the most people, or the one that has the most sound. Like, here's the thing. There's even context among the lists. So you can't even rank the lists without having a clear definition.
I think the best list is the list that most accurately maps to the truth. What about that?
The capital T truth.
Capital T. Yes, the capital T truth. Exactly. Yeah.
I love this.
Nikola Jokic is the best offensive player in basketball right now, right?
Yeah, that was the easiest part of
that was the easiest part. I wanted to stop after that. I was like, fantastic. I've done my work. Nothing to see here. No controversy. Whether he's having the best offensive season ever or is the best offensive player ever, we can earmark that. We'll come back to it later. We're definitely going to give that its coverage that it deserves. Yes. What would you like to add?
Can I just read something about Jokic? This is just like your weekly Jokic insanity stat.
Yeah,
right
sure.
Here.
Yeah.
Okay. So here are the last 3 seasons. And the most recent one might be a bit off. I don't know when I checked this data, right? I can't do this all the night before. So it's probably a couple days old, but it's pretty close. So here's his on-off offensive rating from the past 3 seasons. All right, on-off offensive rating. So 3 years ago. I don't know what season it is. I should have written down the season. So 3 years ago. 2 years ago. I don't know. 3 years ago. Plus 22.5. Just an offense. They're 22.5 points better on offense when he was on the court 3 years ago. 2 years ago. Sorry, I'm getting this really confused.
What's happening, Cody?
It's been a day, Ben. It's been
Cody,
a day.
what's going on? You could just make this up. No one would even know. You keep correcting yourself.
Making some things up, and here I am just shouting some stuff up. Can I try that again? I'm going to try that again for the people who are here live, right? You get to see this happen. We're not going to edit it out. Everyone gets to hear it. 2 years ago, the Nuggets are 22.5 points better when he's on the court versus off.
Mm-hmm.
Last year, 16.5 points better offensively when he's on the court versus off. This year, 20.5 points better offensively when he's on versus off. Ben, that 3-year run is impossible. Like, that doesn't even make sense when I look at those numbers.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you don't have a backup center, the argument goes, you don't have a backup center, and the offense is perfectly built around you, and all the other players cater to you while you're on the court, and then you go to the bench and you forget how to play. It makes total sense. It's just totally normal stuff to happen on a yes. You have more to add?
It's the old LeBron argument.
It's the LeBron argument. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some truth to those things from a team building perspective and contextualizing the stats, but those stats are just ridiculous. There are many more ridiculous Jokic stats. We'll have to save it for another day. For now, would you agree with me that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is the second best offensive player in the league?
I am close on that one. This is where my certainty started getting askew.
Okay. All right.
I don't think it's like 100% capital T truth, Ben.
Sure. Okay. Who else is challenging for that position?
I think you could probably have a conversation with Luka Doncic in there.
Not right now.
Wait. Okay. How are we considering this? Like,
we should have mentioned this earlier. Yes, okay. We should have mentioned that the way we were approaching this exercise, as always, is forward facing, as if there's a playoff scenario that's going to happen. We are also not going to worry about little, small nagging injuries like an ankle or a back or a groin for a week or two or something like that. If you have a catastrophic injury, I don't know about you. I'm not comfortable just gifting you like Joel Embiid. I can't just be like, Joel Embiid, once he gets back with a new knee in 2028, we'll be good to go. No problem. So small injuries. Okay. But it confuses people sometimes because we're not projecting forward much. Right? We're not being like, in 3 months when Luka is this and when he has that and when this. You're really just kind of saying the way the player is playing now, how does that map to if they start encountering playoff opponents, or how does that directly map to like serious high-level playoff opponents? So with that said, we probably should have mentioned at the top, we got a little too excited about the reveal of the number one offensive player. To me, Luka right now is... He's not really close to where he's been the last couple of years at that peak level. I think he's still going to be talked about today. I mean, we might go into it right now, but would you say right now that you think he has a challenge there? Because based on how he's played since he came back for the last, I think it's only been 12 games still, but he's not there for me.
So maybe that's the unfair part of this. I'm definitely folding in what I saw at the end of last year and some of those playoff rounds. That's part of informing what I'm thinking about with Luka. But I do think the enduring question right now with Luka, obviously it looks like he's a step slower. He's maybe carrying a little bit more weight than last year, et cetera, et cetera. But I think another key question is just how good of a shooter is he actually? And to me, that's more of the X factor that determines it. Because last year was by far his best 3-point shooting season, at least. And right now it seems like it's dipped down closer to that 35-34% that we've been seeing in previous seasons from Luka. So if Luka is closer to the 38-ish% that we saw last year, then I think he's much more into the conversation. If we're talking right now, Shai clearly has him this season. But if I'm folding in like, all right, is Luka actually just going to get back to what he was at the end of last season? Then I think it's a conversation. And if you don't think that's necessarily fair, fine. I'm okay just like blindly putting Shai number 2.
Well, I think the more interesting comparison for people, instead of being hypothetical or worrying about our silly arbitrary rules, is to say, if you look at Shai and the way he's playing right now offensively, how does that compare to what you've seen from Luka's peak?
I see. And I think, I mean, a big part of it is just the shots don't fall like they were, right? And so that's not even like an eye test thing. Like it seems like he's taking the same kinds of shots and they're not falling at the same amount. And if that percentage drops a few points, that's going to shave, at least a little bit off of what I'm seeing. But I think the thing that I'm seeing on the film that is different from last year is just the motor, his ability to move at a faster pace. I mean, even compared to a couple of years ago, even last year, he's a lot slower than what we saw. But I think he's even slower from what I've seen right now than at the end of last year.
Sure. But take your best version of Luka that's existed.
Yep.
Take what we're just talking about right now with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander saying he's the second best player in the league. Would that peak Luka player for you be better? Or would he be worse? Or would it be very, very difficult to decide? And that's kind of where you were coming from.
I think it would be very difficult to decide. And if we're talking actual peak Luka, I might lean his direction.
Yep. Okay. I think I'm almost entirely in the same space overall. But that still means that for me right now, it's pretty much Shai number 2. I'm trying to look at some notes I have here and some numbers, and I think I'm pretty comfortable saying Shai is number 2. We can maybe make some extreme challenges from some of the other players we're going to mention, but like Jokic 1, Shai 2, then it starts to get more interesting, and we haven't even gotten to the really, really interesting part.
Wait. How's there a more interesting part than the next part? The next part's the most interesting. Is there a secret part I don't know about?
Well, I mean, in the sense that, like, I think the next couple players are a more constrained discussion than whatever it was that you said at the top, like 6 or 7 through 17 or something. I think that's where we're really going to have to put our philosophical hats on / get really nerdy and sort of break down different things from different team constructions and strengths and weaknesses. And that might be the most fun conversation we have all year. I don't know. I'm just saying, from an interesting standpoint, who else do you have in front of you that you're going to make the argument could be number 2 or even number 3 on the best offensive players in the league right now?
I'm going to propose somebody that I don't necessarily think he's on Shai's level. He's probably a step down, but I think I'm most comfortable putting him at the 4-ish spot. Mm-hmm. And maybe other people are lower this year. Maybe I'm holding on to something beautiful from the past, Ben. To me, I just can't let go of Steph Curry here.
So you said the 4-ish spot. Who's 3?
Oh, are we not slotting Luka in there right now?
Okay, no, Luka for me not right now would not be 3. No.
Okay. Well, then Steph Curry would go into that spot wherever that is.
Well, maybe I don't want to move past Luka too fast. Are you comfortable thinking that over the next month or 2, if let's literally say we did the playoffs start today kind of thought experiment, are you saying part of what you're seeing is I think he's going to get a little of the rust off. I think they'll figure out the fit a little bit more, just enough to start helping Luka find his groove. And then the conditioning will also come back / health because, he's walking out, he's holding his ankle and his back, and he's got all kinds of, it's kind of like last year in the playoffs when he's like hobbling around and smoking dudes too. So it's like, maybe he's smoking a cigarette. I don't know. Back in the 80s, everyone was into smoking cigarettes and playing professional sports. It's beyond me. So you see what I'm getting at? Like, are you coming at it from the perspective that you legitimately are comfortable thinking he's going to get back near that like insane upper class offensive territory? Because to me, he just hasn't quite been there, which puts him in a group with the sort of the next slot of players that we have to discuss.
All right, first of all, if we talk about the playoffs last year, this is terrible. I'm probably misremembering something. It was probably a lot more serious, but I remember there was a lot like, oh, Luka Doncic is really struggling with a knee injury, and then it would show him, and it was just bloodstained.
Yeah,
And I'm
yeah.
Wait, what kind of a knee injury causes you to just bleed during the game? That's just my clearest image of Luka during the playoffs last year. I actually don't necessarily like the start the playoffs right now demarcation, because it feels like Luka's in the Shaq position right now, where you go back to 2001 and you just slice the season at some point and be like, all right, if the playoffs started right now, how would Shaq look? It's like, well, not great, because Shaq ramps himself up to that. And to me, holding on to the fact that I think that Luka is going to progressively get better, get into more shape, get closer to the playoffs, and realize that, hey, now it's the time to really lock in. I'm going to get back into my playoff shape. And I think if I factor all of that in, I'd feel a little bit more comfortable putting Luka at number 3, just because of the run that we saw, like I said, at the end of last year. So maybe I'm more comfortable doing that for Luka to get him into that 3rd spot. But I could also hear an argument against it and wouldn't argue with it at all.
Okay, I like that. I mean, that makes sense. It does introduce, I think, a bit of a moving target for the discussion, but I think the idea that there's some Shaq connection holds some water with me. More importantly, Luka has just been ridiculously difficult to deal with in a playoff setting. And, we're in 2025. It's not 2018 or 2022 anymore. We've talked about the evolution of offense a ton on this podcast and in other videos we've put out. And so the idea that you're just going to run spread pick and roll and stand around with 3 or 4 stationary shooters and, Bob's your uncle and you run to the finals, it's not the same. It's harder to succeed that way. And yet, any kind of pick and roll, middle, isolation, hunting game, the tempo that he controls, there just has not been a really good answer for that outside of teams like Boston, who can throw the right defenses at him and just a ton of all defensive players. And so I do think there's something to even in this state, giving him a little extra credit compared to some of the other players because of how good he's been in the playoffs. So I am okay with that. I do also think that Steph Curry has probably, we said Jokic, we said Shea. The next player I had was Curry, and maybe the last player I still feel kind of comfortable about because he's just been, if you look at like his 3-point shooting, the volume of 3-point shooting, watch the games, his movement, the decision making, all this kind of stuff. It's not close to peak Steph Curry in terms of breaking the league impact. The league is caught up to him in so many ways in the last decade, so many coverages and personnel changes designed to deal with stretching the floor and spacing the floor and even deal with movement shooters because they're a lot more in vogue and they're a lot more difficult to guard. And so you need an answer for them. But when you look at Steph, like I think he's top 10 in our box plus minus model for Patreon subscribers, patreon.com/thinkingbasketball. Dunks and threes estimated plus minus, which is, one of the better, if not the best, sort of public one number stat we have that takes box score and tracking data and other things like that. I think Krishna Narsu's LeBron also has him as a top 10 offensive player. In the last couple months since New Year's Day, he's been absolutely cooking. So you put all that together and it's like, I don't know if there are really any other offensive weapons that can distort the game the way he does and potentially take over games. And he's actually had a ton of takeover games in the last month or so. And maybe that's a building up to the playoffs thing. Maybe when you're 36, 37 years old, you're like, I don't need to go ham in November and December. We kind of have to tailor our season to the idea that we know we need to be in the best shape and in the best condition in April and May, and that's when I'm going to exert the most effort. And so, yeah, I think he would be next for me before things start to get really difficult.
So here's my question for you, because this is what stands out when I watch the Warriors. And I think the Warriors are a really fun watch right now. I love watching Draymond Green, Jimmy Butler III, Curry out there all together. They seem to just be in sync. They know exactly how they're playing together. And Curry is still the straw that's mixing the drink before you suck it down, right? He's still the guy that's making the whole engine go. But my question for you is, when I'm watching him, I'm like, okay, he's not as fast as he used to be. He doesn't seem to be as potent as a shooter. He doesn't get the shot off and make it quite as consistently as we've seen. But realistically, anyone else that does that sort of off-ball wing offensive game, does anyone even come close to matching how much latent offensive value he has at the guard position? Like, is there anyone else in the league right now beyond some of those, maybe like Shea, if you were to bring him up. But even him, I don't think he has the same sort of thing. Does any other wing or guard offensive player have the same latent offensive value as Steph Curry right now?
Still probably not. No,
Mhm.
no. I mean, there are guys that have some element of this, from, you know, Duncan Robinson to Donovan Mitchell to Darius Garland to players that kind of shoot and are dynamic with the ball and move around and things like this. But I mean, he's just still the best in class at it. And, you know, it's funny, you said something like, well, his shooting isn't as good as it used to be. And then if you look since, you know, New Year's Day, he's shooting 40% on 13 threes per 75 attempts. And that 13 threes per 75 attempts would be a career high for a full season. So, but by just a little bit, you know, but it's still like, even if he's not the same as 2016 or 2018 Steph Curry, he doesn't have that same advantage. The slightly slower version who shoots a little not so, you know, not quite as good, is still kind of a master of the game out there. And I do think the best in class in this category. And the other thing I'll add with him, I think he's shooting something like 50 plus percent from the mid range this season. All these top players that we're talking about, Nikola Jokic, Shea Gilgeous Alexander. You mentioned Luka Doncic. We've seen this from him, especially last year, where that shot as a swing variable is such a big deal, not just for 3-point shooting and step backs, and the inelasticity of what he provides in the playoffs, where you say, like, it doesn't matter. You can put Rudy Gobert, Zubats, a three, whatever. If I can get to my step back at 37%, you're in big trouble. But Luka also gets to the mid range, and that 14 to 18 foot shot, the little fadeaway, that just expands what he can do so much. So I think all of these guys, and even a couple of the players I want to discuss next, the mid-range level for them, Steph Curry doesn't use it too much, but he goes to it when he needs to. And some of these takeover games in the last month and a half, where he's started to really cook and swung the game, he'll throw in 2, 3, 4 mid-rangers in that, because my theory, Cody, here is that defenses are so good right now at trying to force offenses into what they want. Like, you know, you can't shut down a team anymore. It's impossible. Offensive ratings are too good. The players are too skilled. So you want to push them into spots like above the break 3 from PJ Washington, please. I'll take that over someone else. Long 2 from so-and-so. I'll take that over someone else. A post up from a player that is maybe a weaker post up player, I want to induce them into that with this switch, and then we can force this weaker ball handler to be a playmaker. These are the things that defenses are trying to win with right now. And when you have the 3 levels of scoring, when you can say, yeah, I'll hit you with 2 or 3 straight threes, you're worried about the Curry flurry, and then all of a sudden, I'm going to hit 2 or 3 straight mid-rangers. Now you have to start playing at all 3 levels. It's like throwing combinations in boxing, or not to really throw you off too much, but like baseball pitchers will throw different pitches. It's another
change up. I know a change
yes,
up.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, I think that's the deal.
So the other thing with Curry that I was trying to compare, but then when you dive deeper into the numbers, I think here's the thing: all questions lead to more questions, which is just the best part about basketball. Like, it's just a never-ending web of questions one can ask. Because if you compares rim finishing next to some of these other small guards, right? It's like 63% or something like that, according to PBP stats, right? Play-by-play stats. He's a solid finisher compared to other guys. It's not astronomical. He's not blowing them out of the water, but it's a little higher. But then I dug a little deeper, because I'm like, you know what? He plays next to a wizard of a passer. I wonder how much that affects his ability to finish at the rim. Let me throw some numbers out at you. When Steph Curry's on the court with Draymond Green, 15% of Curry's shots are at the rim, and he's shooting 67% on them. All right. 15% of his shots at the rim, shooting 67%. Mm-hmm. When Draymond is off, it drops down to 9.5% of his shots are at the rim, and he's shooting them at 55%. Right. So then I wonder, I'm like, do I need to watch a little bit closer? Is Steph still getting to the rim and scoring with that like fancy little floater as much as I'm thinking? Or is the percentage kind of skewing the way that I'm seeing the game? Like, is that just not happening as much when Draymond is on the court? And am I actually giving him a little bit of the boost, some of the synergy he gets with Draymond? But then, of course, you start thinking, you're like, well, isn't that part of the thing? Like, Steph Curry can be elevated by guys like Draymond so much. So I'm not really sure. That's just me saying that Curry's a good rim finisher, but some of it might be conflated with Draymond's passing wizardry.
Well, he's also, he's about to turn 37 as we record this. So he's more selective about getting all the way to the basket. So even though he has these shots and the touch, and, this has been well chronicled over the years, the skill still wins out. You saw it in the Olympics. You're seeing it now. If he can sustain that in the playoffs, do you expect, 68% rim finishing from him on some sort of medium high volume? I personally don't. I mean, we're looking at like a couple rim attempts every 75 possessions on average. 16% of his shots is a really low number compared to some of the other players we're going to talk about. So yes, if you're saying the rim part is the weakest of the three levels, I think to some degree that's a byproduct of him not being a super duper star top line offensive player anymore. But man, it's still really good. I mean, I mentioned since the new year, like for Steph Curry, maybe these stats are more pedestrian, but 29 points per 75, 5% true shooting efficiency, better than the league, still relatively low turnover, 50% from the mid range. I mean, it's just, there aren't many players better is the point.
No, definitely not. And again, when you add all of that together, along with some of the latent stuff, the way that he opens up the court, the way that he's able to create with his gravity for guys like Jimmy Butler and Draymond's passing and stuff, I think you put all that together, and I feel pretty confident putting him up as high as we have him on this list.
Okay, so now does it get easier for you, or do you have another clear player in mind here, or are we just starting to hit like, oh goodness, it could be one of 8 players?
Yeah, I think we're kind of getting there. I thought I had I tried to separate it in tiers. That just never really works. I have like a half of a tier, but then I'm like, how different are they from these other guys? So can we just get to the point where we say some names? Can we just throw some names out there?
I'm not quite there yet.
Oh, okay. Can I throw out a name that you might say next?
Yeah.
Okay. We've talked about him. I think on a recent pod. Oh, the Jalen pod. How do you feel about Jalen Brunson around this area?
I have Jalen Brunson right in this ballpark.
Okay.
Yes. The other player, well, I think I'm more comfortable if we have to rank, maybe with the other player, but there were 2 names that I wanted to talk about next. And Jalen Brunson was one of them, and the other one is LeBron James.
Ooh. Okay.
How do you feel about that?
That's interesting. I don't know if I would as confidently have LeBron quite this high without listing like 4 other names.
Okay, good. Let's talk about why.
Okay. What are you, this is an odd sentence to say. I'm never going to say a sentence again. So what do you find so great about LeBron's offense that you would have him this high?
What? Sorry, can you say that again?
All right, let me try this again.
What do I find so good about LeBron James's offense?
Ben, why do you think LeBron is a good basketball player?
Well, this really gets into the conversation of heavy lifting in the regular season, heavy lifting in the playoffs, playing as a primary versus playing as a 1A or secondary player. And this is where I thought we would get to today, because as I was trying to sort this out, it just kept coming up. If you have a team where you need someone to carry them every night and they don't have too much offensive talent, would you rather have Brunson or LeBron?
Wait, so if you had one,
you don't have too much offensive talent and you need a player to carry them every night in the regular season, would you rather have Brunson or LeBron?
I think I'd rather have Brunson.
I would rather have Brunson as well. Okay. I think Brunson we've seen it. He can play heavy minutes. He can carry an enormous load. You send him off ball for a little bit. You put him on ball. You play pick and roll. You play isolation. The guy's a wizard. We can talk about it more if we need to. But I think for that role, you're going to get better results on average with someone like Brunson. Mm-hmm. Now, do you feel the same way about that question in the playoffs? And, you're going to have to go through 2 or 3 competitive rounds in the playoffs. Would you still rather have Brunson?
Didn't we see this at a pretty high level from Brunson last year? Like, I thought he took a pretty enormous load in the playoffs, and there was a dip in his efficiency, but he was still coming at defenses pretty significantly at a super high load. I genuinely think if we're talking the same situation, I'd still probably take Brunson.
Okay. Does it get closer for you, or is it still?
Yeah, just because of LeBron's size, the fact that he probably ramps up a little bit in the playoffs, though I don't know how much more he can ramp up at this point. But I do think the size and physicality and flexibility makes it a little closer.
Brunson had an offensive load of 61 in the playoffs last year. By the way, that means on over 60% of the offensive possessions, he was directly involved by our definition. It's very rare to be over 60. High 60s, 70s almost never gets done, regardless of who your teammate pairings are and, whether you're the only star on the court and things like that. So 61 is very high. That was 32 points per 75 on minus 5% efficiency in the playoffs last year. I think it gets closer as well. And here's where I'm going. If you still said you would rather have Brunson in that position, what about when you get a second really good offensive player on the court? What about when you get another on-ball offensive player on the court? What about when you have situations like the Lakers where they have Luka and Austin Reeves now, if you're the Celtics and you have White and Tatum and Porzingis, just these teams where you need the Nuggets, where you have Murray and Jokic and who else is Michael Porter Jr., right? Like, to win now, I do think you often need two really, really great players or like three or four really good players. If we start thinking about team construction that way, would you still rather have Brunson?
We talked about this on the Jalen pod where as good as Brunson is on offense, when you start getting down and slotting him with higher level offensive talent, I think because of his size, lack of athletic pop, things like that, he loses quite a bit of value in that position. So I think at this point, especially from what we've seen with LeBron next to Luka, I think I would take LeBron at that point.
I think I would take LeBron as well. And I think the thing with LeBron that's become so compelling is his shooting is now legitimately very good. Mm-hmm. We will probably never know whether it's just a heater or something like that. I mean, this has been going on like all year. And when you look at the shot selection and you look at the makes, it seems very legit to me. It seems like an old man who's, he's done it a million times. And he's like, I'm going to go to this little fadeaway here, this little elbow jumper here. I'm going to go to my little sidestep three here. He heat checks quite a bit and, 2 or 3 in a row will go down and then he'll throw up a brick. But you look at the numbers, Cody, whether it's from the mid-range or 3-point shooting. I mean, the last 2 months, 2 months, this is not an insignificant amount of time. He's at 7 threes per 75 on 40% 3-point shooting. Cool. So he's like pretty good volume. That's like actually quite good volume. And 40% 3-point shooting and the mid-range shooting as well has been very good. And then you get into some of the things we talked about recently when we got into the Lakers on a recent podcast, where LeBron James playing in the corner and being one of the smartest cutters in the league, or maybe of all time, and sort of understanding how to call out plays and mismatches and his size and then going to the post. I think the diversity there for me as a plug-in weapon, I think I would rather have him than Brunson, even though if you have like the heavy lifting load, I think Brunson wins that. And I actually think there's a lot of other players that we're going to talk about where you have this crazy divide between like, if you're the only guy on the team or you're the clear number one option, I want you. But if it gets more nuanced and it gets more balanced, I want this other player.
The LeBron thing where you talk about with him being able to take advantage of mismatches and play a little bit more flexibility. I'm thinking about the Boston game recently. And guys, first of all, Al Horford shout out. Like, good Lord, that dude is unbelievable.
Excuse me. This is not an Al Horford hour. This is we're talking about the best offensive players. You control yourself.
But there's one play, and I want to say it was Horford in this play, but it's kind of like early offense type of transition opportunity for the Lakers. And there's Horford and White kind of standing at the perimeter. And Horford is the one that kind of steps off and guards somebody else on the perimeter. And LeBron sees it's him and White in the rim. And LeBron immediately, and again, I'm pretty sure it's Al Horford, LeBron immediately is like, oh, this is a layup, runs into the paint, just bullies White down there, which he'd been seeking out the entire time, gets an entry pass and just puts it in, right? And then you look at some of the finishing numbers. He's like, if you look at his rim attempts, his rim field goal percentage, right? He's in the 82nd percentile in rim field goal attempts this season, 88th percentile in terms of rim percentage finishing this year. And I know not all of that is off the bounce dribbling, but he's able to leverage his attacking off the dribble and posting guys up to the basket to get these high level efficiencies. So to do that at age 40, it's insane, Ben. So all of that, I definitely take it and think as a secondary option. He's definitely higher up than Brunson.
Cody, he's shooting 79% from the rim since New Year's Day. 79% from the rim. And I think we have to think about off-ball shooting and cutting and offensive rebounding, and especially in this league today, post mismatches and kind of understanding how to diagnose things and the vacillation between on-ball and off-ball. I think that's one of the things that stands out to me about watching this Lakers run, whether he was doing it with Austin Reeves or Anthony Davis or Luka Doncic or both Luka Doncic and Austin Reeves. His command and feel for when to attack, and as an extension of the coach. I mean, almost literally, like they're drinking wine, diagramming plays together, and he's out on the court. He's like, yeah, you know what we should do right now, right? I think that value shows up more when you're not just like the brunt force, heavy lifting object. Let me throw in another name right now that we'll probably get to later, but I want to bring him into the conversation right now. I want to pull him off stage from the wings right now. How do you know who I'm thinking of? You think you know who I'm thinking of?
I do. Can I just say it? Can I say who I think you're going to say?
This would be ridiculous if you could just read my mind.
Are you about to say Giannis?
Oh my God, I'm going to say Giannis. Yes.
Okay. I knew this was coming.
Yes. Okay, go ahead.
I think the Giannis case is really interesting to bring up, and I actually find Giannis to maybe be the most difficult offensive player to place on this list. I think I have the most trouble diagnosing just how good he is offensively, because there's things like, look, there's 5 guys in the league right now that have played at least 1,000 minutes this season, right? 5 guys that have played at least 1,000 minutes, and they've taken over 10 rim field goal attempts per 100 possessions, right? The one who's in second place is Daniel Gafford. He takes about 12.5 rim field goal attempts per 100. Giannis is at 17 rim field goal attempts per 100, and he's finishing at 74% at the rim. That's unbelievable volume and efficiency at the rim. And he's just, like you said, he's just a battering ram. He's just a pillar of physicality. And to compare that to LeBron, that's 10 more field goal attempts per 100 than LeBron gets at the rim. Like, that on its own is nuts. Then if you look at the past for Giannis, his on-court offensive rating during the regular season is always extremely strong. Like, if I remember off the top of my head, I think it's better than when Dame is on by himself, and their offense is definitely better when they're both on. So he has a history of being just this incredible floor raiser for the regular season. But you get to the playoffs, the number dips pretty significantly. Like, we have not seen much evidence of a strong playoff offense when Giannis is on the court. Granted, a lot of it is sacrificed on the back end, right? Their defense always gets incredible. So there's a weird modulation there, and I'm not really sure what to do with all of those pieces of information.
I will add another data point to what you just said, because we certainly have seen Giannis and the Bucks have a little bit of a 90s Sonics thing going on, where the regular season offense for Giannis looks great. Then you get to the playoffs, and you know, if you're, go back to the baseball metaphor, if you're throwing heat and your fastball is 100 miles an hour and it takes care of all the regular season hitters except for the really good ones, and then you get to the playoffs and they start teeing off on you and you don't have another pitch, then you have a problem. And that's an oversimplification for Giannis, because he's still in this conversation as one of the best players in the league. But I think if you took a sort of quote unquote naive perspective statistically, and you said it's the Karl Malone argument, right? You just said, like, hey, let's just look at the regular season. Let's not worry about matchups. Let's not worry about the playoffs. Like, we would have already said Giannis's name, right? I mean, he is just an absolute animal in the regular season. But the stats I was going to throw at you, Cody, they jumped out to me. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring Giannis in. I love how I'm talking about it like I'm bringing him as a guest right now. Like, he's going to join them. He's like, a third box is going to pop up on the screen. He's just going to join us to explain this. I wanted to bring him into this discussion because we often talk about what happens to players' stats and the team performance when they're the lone star on the court, when there's one other star on the court, when there's 2 stars on the court, when you have to divide the heavy lifting. This is what we're just alluding to with LeBron and Brunson. And in the case of Giannis, when he is on the court with Damian Lillard in 1,200 minutes, he averages 33 points per 75. That's a lot of points. He averages 33 points per 75 on plus 4% true shooting. These are fantastic numbers, right? The team offense is 119 offensive rating. When Lillard goes to the bench, he averages 33 points per 75 on plus 7% true shooting. It actually goes up a little bit. And the team offense is 119. It is exactly the same. It is just like a metronome. It's like, I don't care who you put out there with me. I'm going to do my thing with a not so great offense, right? Like that is not a dynamic offense, right? Taurean Prince, Taurean Prince taking handoffs and jumping in the air and thinking, where should I pass? And then just landing and committing it up and down and handing the ball to the official. If you missed that, it was one of the highlights of the year. Who was that game against? Where Taurean Prince?
It's the literal first possession of the Hawks game.
The first possession of the Hawks game.
Go pull up the first possession of the Hawks game. Words can't explain it. Is
it the highlight of his career? Does it top Taurean Prince explaining what a rebound is when he was at Baylor? It's that good. It's up there. So that Giannis can do that. Giannis does that, and in the regular season, like year in year out, I think he's been one of the best offensive players, and he just gives you a floor as an offense. And you see it this year. They're destroying or successfully pounding most lower class and middle class teams, and then against the upper class teams, it is the exact opposite. They're now 2-13 against the upper class teams. So Damian Lillard is his running mate. He's another really good offensive player. We're probably going to discuss him in a little bit, where he fits in this conversation, this type of conversation. And when Damian Lillard plays without Giannis, 31 points per 75 plus 7% true shooting. What the offense, by the way, is not that great. When he plays with Giannis, that goes way down to 23 points on plus 4% efficiency. His playmaking load goes way down. So from an offensive load perspective, you're actually talking about up near 60 without Giannis and down near 40 with Giannis. And to me, that is the, like, in numbers, if you could represent it in numbers, the sort of Giannis question in this conversation, right? Because Giannis does his thing no matter what. He doesn't move, right? Other players aren't going to affect him because he is the star system. But what does that mean for incorporating other players, even really good ones, who, when that pairing showed up last year, there were a lot of basketball nerds who were like, oh my God, Giannis Lillard 2-man game. This is going to be better than Jokic and Murray. Like, look at what they do. Look at how great Giannis is without him. Look at Lillard's skill set. And I think on paper, those things are all true to some degree, but also, and to fairness to them in these numbers, like I don't think the role players are particularly dynamic, right? But to me, it is the big question of, like, okay, what does it mean when you're not running the Giannis offense? How good can the Giannis offense get you if no one else is involved? And then what does it mean when you're not running the Giannis offense?
And I think, we talked about this when the trade happened, where, the 2-man game in theory sounds really good. But the thing about Damian Lillard, and obviously this fits into the 2-man game, but I think there's always comparisons. People are like, oh, he shoots from really far away. He's just like Stephen Curry. Like, imagine Giannis with all that space. But the thing about Damian Lillard and the way that he spaces the floor is that he spaces the floor by having the ball and then pulling up from like 40 feet and nailing it. And the spacing you get from that sort of thing is just different from somebody who's running a track meet down there, who's like, hey, I've watched every clip of Rip Hamilton growing up. Hey, I watched Reggie Miller. I watched Ray Allen growing up, right? That's different from having the ball and being like, I'm actually closer to Trae Young than Steph Curry. So I think, sure, in theory, like, the shooting looks good, the rolling is good, and whatever else, but their skill sets aren't exactly synergistic, right? They're not exactly the same sort of the sort of thing that you'd like to see clicking together like a couple of Legos that are going together. And I think that complicates both of their cases, because then if we transition to Dame for a second, I don't know if you're trying to do that. He historically, across the regular season, the last couple of years, unbelievable offensive impact, right? You go back to the Portland days and, some of the on-off numbers are incredible right before the trade. He's like a plus 12 difference in terms of how good their offense is when he's on the court versus off the court. And even the last couple seasons with Milwaukee, it's still like plus 7 on off, right? And obviously that factors in some of the minutes with Giannis and whatever else, but this is still a guy with a pretty big footprint who's scoring at a high rate. And honestly, I think Dame is probably underrated as a passer, right? As an on-ball guy that's going to drive and move the ball. He has the short thing, right? He has that issue, and the same thing as like a Jalen Brunson, where he's not going to be able to see the court like somebody like Luka, like LeBron or something like that. But I still think he's a very good operator out of the pick and roll for passing. So Dame himself, like, I don't necessarily know going into a playoff situation which of those two players you would call a better offensive player, Dame or Giannis.
I don't want to skirt over what you call the short thing, which I'm sure there's a more sensitive way we could phrase that. But the size issue, Cody's like, what?
Okay,
6'4"?
So I say the short thing, and you're like, the size issue. Like, it's the exact same thing. Spinning. We got Squealer out here spinning what Napoleon's saying on the farm. Go on, continue.
I'm just saying, I don't think we should overlook that in terms of what happens in the playoffs and what happens in playoff competition. I have historically been a little bit underwhelmed by Damian Lillard in the playoffs, and that's back when he was younger, and that's back when he was at his peak, and that's back when he had an offensive team completely geared toward all of his strengths as an offensive player. And yes, of course, he has all these famous moments with these big shots and whatnot, but whether you look at it from a statistical perspective and you look at the drop off in his performance statistically, or you look at it from an X's and O's perspective, where you put length on him and good point of attack defenders. Drew Holiday says hello, but he's of course not the only one. Like, you put point of attack defenders with length who are skilled on Damian Lillard, and it bothers him quite a bit. And one of the reasons why it bothers him quite a bit is, what is the counter for that? He can't move off ball like Steph Curry. He can't go to the post. He is not a dynamic cutter because he's so small. So I think all those things actually are a really big differentiator in what we're talking about here. And it's like, yeah, if we have to pick between Lillard and Giannis, maybe we can do that in a second. That's hard. But I think that's a big deal when looking at someone like Dame. Whereas, well, let me get your thoughts on that before I throw us to another pairing.
Okay, can I answer that with a question though?
Well, it wouldn't be a Thinking Basketball podcast episode if you answered it with a statement.
Yeah, I never answer questions. My answers are always questions, Ben. Who handles that sort of change of defensive personnel, the guys that are defending them more in the postseason? Do you think Brunson is better at it or Lillard is better at it?
I personally think Brunson. Now, the thing with Brunson, though, is we've seen the Brunson blitz from the Knicks have gotten this double team treatment in the playoffs in the past couple seasons, where you throw a couple big bodies on Brunson 30 feet away. He's got to get the ball out of there. And because of his size, he can't hurt you from that position directly. So it's not like, hey, we trap Brunson and all of a sudden it's Draymond Green disaster coming downhill. I think if he had a better partner out of the short roll, maybe you could alleviate that. Of course, if he was bigger, you could also alleviate that. But just, I think for the spirit of your question, I think Brunson's physical, like he's a dog, right? He's super physical. He's got those strong legs, plays off 2 feet, gets in the paint a ton. And it goes back to what I said about the mid-range. All these top players for me right now have a bunch of counters geometrically. They can go to different places on the floor and pull on different levers to score. Lillard is a little bit on the lighter side in that perspective for me.
And I think when we're talking about off ball too, I just think Jalen Brunson's a better off ball player. He's not Steph Curry. Of course, that's just an unfair comparison. But I think Brunson gets off ball. He sets screens better. He can duck in and take some people bumping him off ball more. So I think you're right about Brunson having more value in that role.
Okay, so you thought this was going to be easy. I'm going to make it harder. Because Brunson's partner, Karl Anthony Towns, is like an inverse of Giannis, right? Because this guy is a mega spacer and incredible kind of plug and play big man. Now, we can debate about whether he should be a 5 or he should be a 4, or how much you can get away with playing him in either slot. But certainly in New York this year and in the past in Minnesota, when he's been the center, it's a little bit like a cheat code for everyone else, because KAT's game as an offensive player is very much about attacking mismatches and spacing the floor, and then attacking off that spacing as a sort of advantage finisher, right? Like, someone else creates a little bit of advantage, you move your guy over to help, you throw it to KAT, he can either shoot that 3 or drive the closeout. If you put a small on him and he can take him to the post, you can get some success there. If you put a big on him, he drives by. Now, the one thing I'll say this season that Knicks fans know too well is if you put a big wing on him who has some agility and strength, that stifles some of his self-creation a little bit, which gets into the issue of KAT, I think, in this conversation. He is not a great offense unto himself by any stretch of the imagination. When he's out there alone, whether it's this year in New York or in the past in Minnesota, his individual stats always go up. Yeah, let's pull him up, Cody. Let's look at on-off. Like, okay, all the stars are off. He's averaging 32 points, and his efficiency, the offense is never very good. The offense is never very good because his passing numbers that we estimate actually plummet when he's in that position. So the little extra KAT passes, the passes where he's at the top and the Knicks are running split cuts and he makes a nice read, that go away when you try to run the offense through Cat. So as a number one heavy lifting offensive guy, I don't think I have Cat in the top 10 or 15 of this conversation if we had it, right? But
No.
as a number two, number 1A complementary piece to a wing or a guard, I'm not sure how many bigs in the league outside of like Jokic you'd rather have than Cat. It's extreme polarization to me.
You say that about bigs, though, specifically, because I think if you were to compare him to other secondary offensive players, I'm still not sure if Towns ends up in the top 10 if we factor in the playoffs, because I think some of his playoff potency drops down. You see him like when you throw a double team at him. I don't know if anyone, I think I've said this before, I don't know if anyone in the league reacts as negatively to a double team as Karl-Anthony Towns. Like he gets like, he curls the ball like he's about to whip a dodgeball somebody in gym class, and he does that weird hooking pass, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, he's getting frazzled out there. And when Towns get frazzled, the whole thing's thrown apart, right? And so I think that's the thing, is you get a lot more playoff intensity defensive wise on him. I think he loses quite a bit on that side of it. Of course, as a secondary guy, especially next to somebody like Brunson, who's just going to be a sponge of defense, he's going to take away all of that, and Towns just needs to attack some of these gaps. He's going to be able to alleviate some of Towns's situations in those. But I don't know. I still don't trust Towns to be that high as an offensive secondary guy in a playoff series.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so you think even when he's in a position where you have another sort of on-ball player, you have a guy to balance him out who may be a better offensive player or is a comparable overall offensive player, clearly a better number one option like Brunson, you think even in that role, he doesn't have the potency, spacing the floor as a finisher, as a secondary guy, as a post mismatch attacker? You think he loses that in the postseason too?
I think it's alleviated a bit in that situation, but I do think he's not going to be as potent as he is in the regular season.
Very interesting.
What do you remember seeing last year in the playoffs next to Anthony Edwards? Unless you don't count Anthony Edwards as playing that sort of role that Brunson is to him this year.
No, I do count that. I felt like last year 97% of Cat's oxygen in the room was devoted to defense in the playoffs. That was my lasting impression. We can circle back on the numbers. I mean, of course, I do remember us talking specifically about that one game that we thought was the best game of his career, where the number, I think it was it in the Denver series?
It was like game 6.
It was one of the games. It might've been game 6. It was one of the games in the Denver series where he finished with 28 points and 10 rebounds or whatever. It wasn't that it was some statistical outlier, but the overall quality of game, the decision-making, didn't he have a shooting slump as well at some point during the playoffs last season? He just missed a ton of shots. I mean, I wonder how much in a small sample that influences us, because we've seen some players whose numbers go down like that consistently. And you say all right, Cody, you're spot on. Like he cannot sustain this level of latent value or 40% 3-point shooting in the playoffs. But I also say if he can, I'm not going to discount him just because he has a bad shooting series or two.
Man, I wish
you're making a face like you're making a face like you know something that I don't know.
No, I wish I could remember exactly which Denver game it was. I don't know if it was the last game, because they went 7, right? There was 7.
Yeah, it went 7. Yeah,
it was either game 7 or 6. But the main thing is that it was his defensive pressure against Jokic. It was the best I'd ever seen him defensively, and we agreed that it was the best game we'd seen. But it's not like he was shooting 5 for 6 from the 3-point line or having an enormous off-ball game like that. So. I think my point still kind of holds there. We're talking about the best that Towns ever played, and it's not even on the offensive end. It's actually that he just came together defensively in that one moment. So I don't know. Maybe I'm talking too theoretically here. Maybe I'm being too hard on him. But I do think, like you say, maybe Brunson gets blitzed again, and then all of a sudden the defensive team is going to force Towns to make all these decisions as a short little kind of outlet valve. Do you trust him in that situation, kind of handling that increased burden in trying to get Brunson away from the ball?
Well, I wouldn't say that's his strength. No, no, I don't think that's a great role for him. I mean, this gets back to the playing the 5 or playing the 4, because last year playing the 4 in Minnesota, you don't convey as many benefits spacing wise and skill wise as if you're replacing the 5. And Rudy Gobert, of course, is a 5 who's kind of the opposite. Rudy Gobert is a 5 that is every year that goes by in basketball's evolution, he becomes less and less skilled relative to the average player. And so not only can he not shoot, but when you get him the ball in those situations, when you get him the ball in a short roll outlet, or you ask him to play delay at the top where he's initiating and players are running off him and he's playing handoff game or hitting cutters, he's getting less and less skilled relative to the other, a couple hundred players in the league who will be in that position beside him. So yeah, I actually think Cat is probably harder to rank than maybe anyone on this entire list, including Giannis. And he's like the inverse of they're the same puzzle on different ends of the extreme.
So, okay, let me ask you this then. Going to a playoff series, just on the offensive end, I don't know if you can divorce the two. Would you trust New York's offense more in the playoffs if Towns is in that position or if you swapped him out for Giannis?
So New York's offense only is I mean, this gets really difficult to do a thought experiment on because is Tom Thibodeau going to reconfigure the offense around Giannis? Because if you put Giannis in Towns's role in the offense right now, they categorically get worse in the regular season and the playoffs.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're saying that there needs to be some moving the puzzle pieces around to make the offense work.
Yes, and then I think you get to some interesting things where you say like, okay, does that actually minimize Mikal and Josh Hart and OG Anunoby and Miles McBride, some of these periphery players, because part of what Thibodeau as an X's and O's nerd has like built out there, and part of the cool sort of funky element of this offense that we explored in a recent video is that when you put Cat in it, it kind of magnifies all the strengths of everyone. It magnifies the geometry of the system and the movement and the spacing and the cutting and the rebounding. If you were to put Giannis in that role, the dude who cannot shoot at all, it would completely change. Because when Precious Achiuwa plays that role, it almost breaks the offense. And I think that's why Cat has had such amazing numbers in this regular season. In fact, the New York Knicks offensive rating with Cat on the floor and Brunson on the floor is 122. The New York offensive rating with Cat on the floor and Brunson on the bench is 122. So yeah, I think he's the hardest player to rank.
Okay. We'll have to circle back to him because I feel like there's a really good case on either side that we laid out. And I just don't know. It depends on everyone else we bring up here. Can we go to another set of teammates? That's always fun to disentangle, Ben.
Is it the Cleveland Cavaliers?
It's got to be the Cleveland Cavaliers, Ben.
Yeah, I'll let you take the lead on this one.
Well, let's start with Donovan Mitchell for a second. Because the thing about Mitchell that makes this so difficult in my mind is that we're not talking about the best scorers, right? We're not making a list of the top 10 scorers in the NBA. Because if you look back historically, like Donovan Mitchell legitimately has some of the best scoring off seasons we've ever seen. Like a couple of those postseasons. I know we're like 3 years removed from some of them, but this is still a guy that it kind of doesn't matter. Like he really ramps up his volume and efficiency. He can kind of get to wherever he wants. His pull-up three-point game is incredible. He's so strong and athletic and lanky compared to some of these other short guards that he can get to the rim, and he has a little bit more value in terms of once in a while grabbing an offensive rebound and just being a monster down under the paint. But in terms of comparing him to some of these other guys that we talked about, I think the passing game is relatively weak, right? You compare him to Brunson, you compare him to Lillard, you compare him to his teammate Darius Garland. He's the volume of his passes are down. I think he just doesn't make as many high-level reads as some of these guys. And so I think you have somebody that you just can't slow down scoring-wise in the playoffs, and he's a solid passer. So when you take that together, I don't know what the equation turns into in that case.
Yeah. Do you have a feeling about which one of these players is better for you offensively?
Honestly, I texted Mike De La Rosa about this too. I was like, I'm really struggling between these two because I think if you actually line up the statistical argument, especially in the regular season, this year, you kind of throw out last year because Garland there was some injury weirdness going on. I think it really hampered his game quite a bit. I kind of think it looks like Garland has been the better offensive player. He's a significantly better passer. I think he's much more comfortable operating in the pick and roll. Their offense is like significantly bounds better than when
What?
Donovan Mitchell's on the court with Darius
What?
Garland, right? Is
What
that
is-
not right? Garland
that
on
right?
the court without Mitchell? Absolutely. Their offense is much better when it's a Garland-led offense versus a Mitchell-led offense during the regular season. But I just don't know with Garland's size if he's going to be able to retain as many of those skills that Mitchell has when they go into the playoffs.
It's not just size for me. I assume you mean strength and
Yeah, absolutely.
his
yeah.
length.
I'm talking
and,
weight room too, Ben. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. It's not just that. It's that Mitchell's self-generated offense. I mean, he has one of the highest shot releases in the league, despite being 6'1", because of those freakish arms that are like 6'10" or whatever his wingspan is. And he has a massive vertical leap. And he plays with that old school style of like, I would like to jump over you to shoot over you. And he can do that along with his quickness and his step back and his space creation against most players. And so if you look at like, and maybe I'm indexing too much on this, maybe I'm indexing too much on the series with the Celtics this year. If you look at those 4 games, it felt to me like he was the one who was always going to the well when the Cavs needed it. Give me the ball, I can make a play. I can make a play out of playmaking because I'm a good playmaker, but more importantly, I can create an advantage athletically and with my skill. I can touch the paint and create problems by collapsing the defense, or I can just shoot over you and like, yeah, I'm only going to go 3 for 7 on these pull-up threes in the quarter, but when it's like 6-2 after 6 minutes in the quarter and all of a sudden you can hit 3 of 7 pull-up threes, that becomes really good offense and really critical offense. And so I kept going back to that where I'm like, there are things about Garland's game that if you just put him on paper, better passer, yeah. Better pure shooter, probably, yeah. Better maybe ball handler functionally in terms of getting to spots, maybe better, yeah. Like you just put these things on a list and it looks like Garland should be better. But I'm actually not sure that's the case when you combine some of the rim pressure, the strength physically, the shot generation, and then Mitchell's IQ has impressed me. Just his experience, his understanding of where to go, where to attack, where to have a mismatch, telling players things. Like Garland does not strike me as being very vocal. Mitchell has become much more vocal in situations, even defensively, but especially offensively this season. And I kind of feel like if I had to pick one, I would go in that direction.
Okay. Something I'm looking at too, you look at the last 3 years of offensive on-offs. Donovan Mitchell's offensive on-off the last 3 years is plus 3.6. Darius Garland's is about plus 4.5, right? And obviously that's not an end-all be-all, but I think it adds still to the statistical argument for Garland. And I think ultimately where I landed is I take everything that you just said, right? You can call on Mitchell whenever you want. He gets to all of these spots, but I don't know how many of those plays you can think back to and be like, all right, he got to exactly where he needed and he made this beautiful pass for like an easy shot. It's just a lot of tough shot making or kind of creating self-generating easy shots for himself. And I'm like, would I be biasing too much towards his scoring ability and not factoring in Garland's passing ability if that's the kind of thing I lean on? And I think where I landed with them is like, if I were to come up with a singular point valuation for these two, I don't know how much daylight there is between them.
Yeah, they're pretty close to me. They're pretty close to me. I think I'm leaning Mitchell.
Okay.
Let's come back to that in a minute when we need to. There are maybe a few other players that I wanted to discuss that we haven't discussed, just maybe to get your thoughts, take your temperature. I think they could be in this discussion. Let's start with someone like Trae Young.
Oh my, this is truly uncanny, Ben. We're an hour and 3 minutes into this, and we're still just connecting on this. Trae Young is fascinating, Ben. I don't know if you've really thought deeply about Trae Young, but I find him to be just a fascinating offensive player. Do you know over the last 2 seasons, he's only shooting 35% from 3? Only 35% from 3. I'm not sure how good of a shooter he is. And that deeply impacts where I'm going to end up placing him on this.
It's really, I'm having like some massive deja vu because in 2018, after he was drafted, I did a podcast with Nate Duncan on Dunked On, our friend Nate. And we talked about these players and Trae came up and I said, I'm not sure how good of a shooter he is. Now he was struggling at that point, but I said, no, I'm not worried about him shooting 27% or whatever it was. But I think I said something exactly like, if you're going to play this style and you're going to be this great and you're going to stretch the floor, there's a huge difference between 36% and 40%. And I think what we've consistently seen is that he's closer to that 36 or 37% line than he is the 39 to 41% line.
Mm-hmm.
And Nate had a interesting rebuttal. He said, like, well, doesn't Trae take very hard shots? And you said, hey, have you thought about this deeply? And to me, the thing I think about is that he can't generate easy shots. So he takes, yes, I'm going to come behind the screen and launch from 29 feet, but that is his version of Jason Tatum's 24-foot pull-up or whatever.
So I thought you were going somewhere else with this, because I thought about that. I'm like, what does Trae Young actually look like when he's shooting quote unquote easy shots? And over the last 3 seasons on wide open 3-point attempts, Ben, 36%. Right. So he seems pretty consistently at 36%, even if you factor in just him being wide open. So you talk about that. You talk about him being able to self-generate easy shots. He's always been struggling at finishing at the rim just because he's, am I not allowed to say the short problem? Is that an issue? The big short problem here, Ben? But he really struggles at the rim because he's even shorter and less vertically stable. And he's really like, how much does a guy weigh?
Well,
right?
160 pounds soaking wet or whatever. I think that's the other part of the issue is that think about all the things we've discussed in the last hour. And then it basically neutralizes Trae as a cutter. Obviously, no offensive rebounding, no post game, no ability to physically create advantages. And the officiating changes, bless them. We need more. Let's get the game even more physical. This is great, right? I think they've really hurt him starting a couple years ago where they started to try to take out the grifting and the foul baiting and the falling down, but then also allowing defenders to make contact. And it's because the other thing that's sneaky about Trae is he's not like the quickest dude in the world either. Super skilled, super creative, great vision, great passer, very exciting to watch. But is he like Tyrese Maxey quick? Absolutely not. So the more guys that can stay in front of him and the more guys that can make contact with him without him just dribbling into them and then falling over and getting free throws, this not only directly takes away points, but as I've said a million times, there's a meta value to knowing that those players can't drive into those spaces and create problems. And I think that's just really like hurt Trae Young's offense compared to where he was a couple seasons ago.
I do want to linger on the passing thing because his passes are just sublime, man. They're just sublime. He is so good at manipulating defenses. Like it feels like there's every game where he throws a lob where he's looking this way, the defense is all shifting there, and then all of a sudden it's up and Capella's throwing it down or whomever else is throwing it down. He's just so good at those. But I do think he loses some of that shine in the playoffs just because you can see the Brunson blitz, I think, against Trae, and that would be quite effective. The other thing is Trae just hasn't played next to good offensive talent ever.
Okay.
Who's the second best offensive player Trae's ever played with?
Well, I think the Heat threw the Brunson blitz at him a couple years ago in the playoffs, right?
Yeah.
I don't know who the answer to that is, but what I was going to ask you is precisely a question about Trae Young's roster construction and who plays next to him, because he's clearly been the straw stirring the drink. Now he had the quote in the offseason about realizing he could pass to his teammates and that they could make plays too. But part of that is because they haven't had many good offensive players. So my question to you, Cody, back on this theme that is dominating my thoughts as we did this exercise and as we're recording this now, if you took Jason Tatum and made him the primary offensive weapon there in Atlanta instead of Trae Young, just swap it. You can put some other players. I don't care. But that is a perfect example of a team that doesn't really have another star to eat up oxygen in the room. And it doesn't really have 2 or 3 good offensive players to play a kind of balanced offensive attack off of. So I'll give you, you could throw another guy in there that we haven't discussed, but I just specifically was interested in someone like Tatum as a comparison as the head of that type of snake. Who do you think does a better job?
Wait, so you have Tatum being the first primary offensive engine on a team like that?
I'm saying trade him. Kick Trae out, put Tatum in there. Does the offense get better?
No.
Okay.
The Trae offense is better.
Comfortably. Okay. Yeah. What about I assume then the offense doesn't get better if Towns is in there.
No.
Okay. What about if Tyrese Halliburton is in there?
It's a fun question, Ben. That right there is a fun question. I don't know. That's an interesting one because Halliburton is another interesting case, Ben.
Yes, yes. Halliburton is a very interesting case. Before we get to the Halliburton case, okay?
Yeah.
Because I did this and I got to Trae Young, and Tyrese Halliburton just jumped out to me like a sore thumb. I'm like, I don't know if I'm over indexing on defense too much, because obviously Trae Young is the worst defender here. But I'm like, I'm not comfortable in certain situations or most situations being like, if you could give me Tyrese Halliburton, I'd rather have Trae Young. I think I'd rather have Tyrese Halliburton across the board.
Yeah.
But before we dive into that, you said something a second ago that's been really itching at my mind. You said that the Cavs offense this year was much better with Garland versus Mitchell.
Yeah.
Are we sure about that? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills again, which is now a norm for every episode. I have it as when they're both on the court, they're 124. When Garland's on the court without Mitchell, it's 126.7. And when Mitchell's on the court without Garland, it's 122.5.
I'm wondering what, because I'm pulling that up right now.
Did you have just some crazy, you're like, the offense is like league average when Mitchell's out there?
I thought it was significantly different. I don't know if it's been a while since I looked at it. I don't know if I looked at a different combination. This, one second. This is great podcasting. I'm looking at some numbers to try and double check.
I'm just saying, right, I don't think the difference is actually that big. It's a little bit better with Garland, which is what we were alluding to and saying, like, Garland checks all these boxes. But I just want to come back and just like say that the numbers with Mitchell are still ridiculously good.
Yeah, you're right. Okay. I was incorrect on that. I thought it was different. I think the golf might have been different earlier
in the season.
The season. So I stand corrected. Thank you for correcting that.
Okay. No, I just wanted to make sure I had my numbers right. We last thing we want to do is misinform people, because I mean, if they want to get misinformed today, they just have to open an internet browser. So where were we? Tyrese Halliburton. He had this period last year where he looked like he was playing at almost an all-time low, like he was just out of his mind offensively and what he was doing with Indiana. Now, there's a lot of sort of asterisks to put on that. One, the Pacers were very offensively centric. Two, they had this defensive style that I think was feeding into their offense. Three, Halliburton was on fire. But since the injury to his hamstring last year, that's calmed down. He's starting to play better again, Cody. His shooting has been red hot in the last month or two. The offense has been very good again. The Pacers are very good. He's a very interesting player. He can't generate a ton of scoring pressure, and he isn't the kind of like Steve Nash, passer territory of just like a layup machine, like cha-ching, 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 dunk, layup for you. It's not quite that, but he's a really good offensive player. Mm-hmm. And I think his decision-making, his extraordinarily low turnover rate related to that decision making, and his shooting, and even he's getting to the rim a little bit more. The floaters are coming into play more in the last couple months than they were back when he was, I think, still struggling with coming off that hamstring injury and just being in his head about things. I even think he's talked about being in his head about things. He's still a really good offensive player, and when you look at like trying to make a list like this, I'm like, yeah, I think I'd rather have him over Trae, and maybe I'm going to try to make some more direct comparisons to figure out where he goes.
There seems to be a clear cutoff January 1st, the start of the new year. Tyrese Halliburton is like, I'm back, right? Because I think it's about 26, games. That last I checked, it was 25 games. So I don't know what's happened to however many games since then. But in that time since January, last I checked, he's shooting 45% on 11 3-point attempts per 100 possessions. That's ridiculous. That's the kind of Halliburton we were seeing last year when he was on that heater. Just ridiculous.
Can you say that again? What was that?
45% on 11 3-point attempts per 100 possessions since January.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
It's about 26 game sample at this point. During that time, he's even been better at not turning the ball over. Like, I know assist to turnover ratio is not like the most popular stat ever, and I don't know how much it means, but it seems to mean something when you look at some of the team level stuff that I'm not going to get into right now. But he's at like a 5+ assist to turnover ratio for the team. He just doesn't turn the ball over. And I know a lot of that probably has to do with him not being able to Nash quite as well, to not drive to the basket quite as well as some of these other guys that we're talking about. I don't know if that factors into it at all. But along with all that, I just like his ability to fit next to other talent, right? He loves getting off ball. He loves pushing it up. You love see kick ahead passes and whatever else. He gets me. It's like, oh, people are going down the court. Go. And then he'll just run around and spot up and hit one of his quick hitter threes. So I think he's a guy that's a joyous offensive basketball player that's just like, let's all get involved and run around and get some open shots.
So as a second option, or 1A option, maybe is the better way to describe it, because I think we can get a little too bogged down with like, oh, do you have Jokic or Shea on your team? Then you're not clearly I don't care about it. Second option, 1A, 1B, whatever. Tyrese Halliburton versus Jason Tatum. Who would you rather have?
Am I factoring in like post-January Halliburton, or like what's the Halliburton I'm looking at?
Well, do you buy that the Halliburton we've seen for the last 2 months is the Halliburton we would get going forward if we entered into a playoff series right now?
Halliburton, final answer.
Wow. Okay. Wow. Yeah. So you don't even have to think about it.
Well, I thought about it for those 10 seconds that you were talking, but yeah, I'm going Halliburton on this one.
Wow. Okay. Can we talk about Tatum?
We can talk about Tatum.
I keep throwing you Tatum passes and you keep passing them back to me. It sounds like you're not particularly high on his offense.
Oh, wow. That's the clip I want. Cody is not particularly high on Tatum's offense. No, I just think in terms of the offensive talent,
that'll be used against you. You could say right now that he's the best offensive player in the league, and you'll still have a Reddit thread about how you think he's terrible on offense because of what I said. It's great.
I don't know who it was. I'm going to call you out, though. But on a comment recently, someone was like, these guys are really low on the Celtics. And I'm like, I picked them as my favorites. Like, what more do you want from me? I think the Celtics are good.
You got it. That's nothing now. You got to be significantly more loyal than that. You have to expect them to be undefeated, or else you're a hater. What were you going to say about Jason Tatum?
I just think he's like, I don't know, a step down offensively compared to a lot of these other guys that we're talking about, which is still
a step down offensively. Okay.
Okay. That puts him right around 15. Like, is it a crime to say I think Tatum is closer to the 15th best offensive player than the 9th best offensive player?
No, but also for me, I kind of am not sure if there's really a difference between the 15th and the 9th best offensive player, which is what I'm trying to figure out. And I think Tatum is yet another example of, if he's the guy carrying the offense, is that better than all but 11 people on this list? Or if he's the 1A or 1B guy, is he better than all but 6 people? Like, do you see him as a heavy lifter kind of player who can make tough shots and run the offense, but it's not going to be peak Luka Doncic? Or do you see him as a guy who the shooting and the size and some of the diversity of his skill, take me into the post and let me do a little shimmy over the shoulder fadeaway from 15 feet. Does that make him, much like we were talking about with LeBron earlier, does that make him like a great 1B piece next to really good offensive pieces? He plays in a system with a ton of good offensive players. I'm going to give you some stats, but first I want your sort of reaction to what I just said, because it's the thing to me. It's everything to me.
I think he's a much better like 1B or 1A, whatever. I don't even know the nomenclature, but whatever that is, I think he's much better at that. And in terms of being like the centerpiece for an offensive team, probably a little bit weaker relatively compared to what we're talking about. But if you want to like slot somebody in as the second best offensive player on a team, give me Tatum over Trae Young like every day of the week.
But not Halliburton.
I think it's closer, but I'm still leaning Halliburton.
Okay, let me give you some Tatum numbers. Just going to give you a couple Tatum numbers.
Okay.
I don't want to go crazy reading the numbers, but
it's going to be tough because I'm a Celtics hater. So
yeah, well, we all know you don't think any of the Celtics are very good. Mm-hmm. So I picked the one that a lot of people think is very good, Jaylen Brown. And realistically, Jaylen Brown is the one who has the biggest load outside of Tatum. And when Tatum's off, he expands his load and things like that, does more heavy lifting. So when Brown goes to the bench and Tatum is out there, Tatum's offensive load goes from 44 to 57. From 44 to 57. His scoring, when Brown goes to the bench, goes from 24 points per 75 to 33 points per 75. 24 to 33. His efficiency almost is exactly the same. Despite going from 24 to 33. Efficiency almost exactly the same. So he expands the playmaking. He expands the scoring. Basically, when Jaylen Brown's off the court, he just shoots a ton of threes. Shoots 17 threes per 100 possessions. Makes the threes at the same percentage this season than when Jaylen Brown is on the court versus off the court. And the last piece of information that I like to look up in something like this, what happens to the team's offense? When Jaylen Brown is on the court with Jason Tatum, the offense is 120. They score 120 points per 100 possessions. When he goes to the bench, the offense improves to 121. Again, almost exactly the same. So I don't know if that changes any of your thoughts on this, but I do think pedigree-wise, skill-wise, size-wise, somewhat shooting-wise, he's a pretty good shooter. I think Tatum actually fits like really nicely as a kind of 1B player who can handle certain heavy lifting, but also play in different systems next to different talent, play quickly, doesn't always have to dominate the ball.
I don't disagree with literally anything you just said. Like all of that is spot on. But the question at hand is, do you like that all more than what you'd see from Halliburton in that position?
Maybe. I think it's very close. I think I like Halliburton as the guy driving the ship more than Tatum. I'm not sure about Halliburton clearly being better in the sort of 1B position.
Okay.
And I think some of that is just the ball dominance of certain players and the value they get from dominating the ball. And I think that has to really be contextualized in a conversation like this because, you said it earlier with Lillard, like if you get off the ball and you lose a lot of your value for the X percentage of time that you have to do that, it becomes a pretty big deal when you're trying to build an elite offense. And if we let's look at the elite offenses in the league right now, right? The Nuggets, we have the number one offensive player on that team. And frankly, when Jamal Murray is on, Jamal Murray's in this conversation. I don't know if he's going to be on and how long he's going to be on and if he's in shape and if he's injured. But I mean, like when Jamal Murray is really bubble Jamal Murray, he would be in the conversation that we're having today. And part of the reason is because he can play off ball. He can play 2-man. He can play in isolation. He's actually kind of big and he can post up people occasionally. Like there's a lot of diversity there to play off a player and then also be the heavy lifter. I think for Murray, he's the weakest as the heavy lifter because you see more of the passing limitations and things like that. I think that's where he really falls short next to the other small guards or medium-sized guards that we've talked about today. But you have them. You have the Thunder. The Thunder have our second best offensive player, and we just did a podcast about Jalen Williams fitting in and Chet Holmgren and sort of, you have, again, multiple good offensive players. And how does your talent, like if you took Shea and you're like, you just have to go stand in the corner all the time. Is he going to be this? Is he going to be my number 2 pick in the league for stand in the corner? I don't think he's going to be like a top 30 pick for stand in the corner. So
we also just don't see that. Like no one just stands in the corner. So I think that's what complicates it a little bit more.
But also there's very few people in the, stand in the corner. I'm saying metaphorically. Yes. Or if you want to literally say stand in the corner, like only looking at that part of the game when you're spotting up weak side or something like that. What's your value when you're spotting up weak side and that kind of thing. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, how many players in the world would you rather have the ball in the middle of the floor? I mean, the answer is always somewhere, like regardless of the context, it's always somewhere between like 0 and 4, right? With these guys, that's why I think it's harder. Like Tatum, Halliburton, like different roles, different mismatches that you can attack, things like that. I think it becomes much closer.
Can I read you a stat that has kind of blowing my mind right now? And maybe I'm a numbers guy that's swung by these kinds of things, Ben. In the last 2 years, when Tatum is on the court and Jaylen Brown, Derek White, and Jrue Holiday are on the bench, 471 minutes, Ben. They have an offensive rating of 127.
That's the Peyton Pritchard effect. Yeah, that's the Peyton Pritchard effect.
So that here's the thing. Remember when you yelled at me about overrating all these Grizzlies guys? Maybe that's what we're doing with the Celtics. We're getting the Celtics bounce in terms of how good this system is. That's what's going on.
For Tatum.
For Tatum. For all of them. Except for
Tatum,
Holiday, who's being underrated still.
Yeah. There's only a few other players I really want to peripherally ask you about before we wrap. Interestingly, someone from the audience has asked about Cade Cunningham. I had Cade Cunningham on my board when trying to figure out, the tie between the 7th and 16th best offensive players or whatever it is. I put Cade on the other side of the line. I don't think he's quite good enough, but I also think he's very close, if that makes sense. Maybe very close is an exaggeration. He's close. He was close enough for me to say this is one of the best offensive players in the league. And, we haven't seen it in the playoff setting. What do I see? How is it going to be attacked? Things like that. Very good, but not quite in this final, cutoff of players that we're trying to sort out, basically.
He's definitely good at generating tough shots and making them. I think his mid-range jumper looks really solid. He takes some difficult ones that you get to the playoffs, you're going to have to count on a little bit more. He's strong, so it's tougher to get him off those spots, but the rim finishing is really weird to me, right? For a guy that size, he's like a high 50% at the rim, and I would just like to see a little bit higher than that for someone like that. But we've talked about it, some of the physical limitations in terms of athleticism, getting to the rim and stuff like that, his quickness. But yeah, he seems to be an improved shooter, which helps him a ton. He's a fantastic passer, but the scoring game, I'm still not 100% believing in, but I did consider him. He has like a little X next to it in terms of like, oh, you're in the conversation, but you're not quite going to be in top 10.
Yep. Now, would I be shocked if Cade, like, what does he have to do to get there? Not too much is what I was saying. If he could come in a playoff series or next year, expand some stuff, make the shot a little more consistent, improve the rim finishing a little bit more. I mean, he's a really good passer and he can make hard shots, and the 3-point shot continues to get better. And I think you put that all together and you have someone that is very compelling in this conversation of like the best offensive players in the league. So, okay. The only other players I wanted to ask you about, one of them I think is going to be real quick, and the other, who knows what's going to happen with the other. Ja Morant is the real quick one because I feel like he's still a very good offensive player. I'm saying this like he's not actually statistically he's having a perfectly fine year. But as we've discussed, some of the rim pressure, the rim finishing, downstream, fewer free throws, hurting the efficiency. To me, that's taken him back out of this kind of like either to the back of the pack or out of this kind of conversation.
Yeah. I am struggling by how much teams can kind of scheme against his inability to really punish teams with shooting, right? Tremendous at getting to the basket. You can't stay in front of him. Fantastic passer. But yeah, I want to see it in a playoff run. The reduced load is making me a little bit nervous. I'm wondering how much he's going to be able to stay healthy for a clear period of time. Suspended? What word am I trying? Sustained. There we are. Good Lord. Hour and a half in. I can't remember words. I just want to see him try and put it together for a sustained period of time.
Okay. The last player who I actually do think is much more compelling to talk about, although maybe we already had the conversation with Giannis and it's just the same conversation, is Zion Williamson. Yeah. Cody Ewing. It's so funny. I knew Cody was not going to be in a position to talk about Zion Williamson. I know when I said it right now, he made a face. He's like, who the heck could Ben be talking about? And I'm talking about Zion Williamson, who since New Year's Day, because Zion, of course, missed a lot of time. So since New Year's Day, he has averaged a cool 32 points per 75 on plus 5% true shooting. And, he's done it in a system that I don't think is particularly favorable to I'll just say anyone. I mean, I'll be an equal opportunist hater here. I don't want to really get into the Pelicans thing right now, but I think he has looked great physically. He has played a number of great games. He has played really good teams really well. They're very difficult for teams to stop him from getting near the basket. His touch around the rim is obviously very good. And I think it goes back to a Stan Van Gundy question of like 2021. Can you create an offensive system where you can kind of unlock him as a point guard? What are the limitations? Because in Zion's case, off ball, he cannot shoot. That's not a thing you think about, but he can cut. He can absolutely cut. And not only can he cut and finish a pass or an offensive rebound, but he's a lob threat. He's a vertical threat when he cuts. So it just feels like there's like untapped territory there based on how the dude is playing right now. As an aside, whispering to the basketball gods, please don't let Zion come back next year in this shape and squander the year. Please, let's have some trade him somewhere, free agent. I'll take anything. But I feel like to Cody, you're like almost the epitomizing this. He's kind of being lost right now in New Orleans. And my question is like, how much of an offensive weapon is this guy? Even though if we did our list of 1B and second options, I don't think he would be in the top 5 or top 10 conversation.
If you factor in basically any shot outside of the paint, I think he's taken 18 of them, right? That includes a long mid-range. That includes threes.
Amazing.
He just doesn't take them at all. I'm not even saying that as a negative thing, right? Maybe it is. Maybe if we talk about Giannis in terms of like he can't space the floor, like Giannis has no interest in spacing the floor.
But
right?
but Giannis, tell me what you think. I think Giannis's mid-range has been a nice little addition to his game this year.
Absolutely. I think the turnaround, especially the face-up 15-footer type of shot, looks good. And Zion, that's just not something that's in his repertoire. The thing that blows my mind about Zion is the touch he has. Obviously, it's the vertical pop that gets people and the strength and physicality, but he's got a really soft touch when he's able to gets around people and he puts it off the glass. Like, I think that's really the thing that shocks me about it. But, we talked about it in terms of like he's at least in the conversation when you talk about some of the best rim finishers of all time. And when you have a superpower that's genuinely unstoppable, I don't know. That's really interesting. But then, Ben, here's the thing. And this is maybe the point we're going to end on. He's never played a playoff game. I don't know what happens when a team schemes against him.
To support this podcast, patreon.com/thinkingbasketball. It's where you can get our extra video content this year. And I actually want to have a little bonus segment right now, Cody.
We're an bonus segment. We're an hour and a half.
For everyone who turned off the show, joke's on you. We've been talking about best number ones, best number 1Bs and 2s and things like that throughout the episode. We can attempt to try to kind of wrangle together a final ranking or something. But to me, having this conversation, one, I feel like it would be hard. Like it's hard to have someone like Zion over Giannis. Mm-hmm. It's like he's gatekeeping that archetype or something. Two, if I had to pick only like primary first options with like one other secondary offensive player, what would your top 5 look like?
Wow. As a first option, you said.
First option, and you don't even your second, like I guess your second best player can't be another top 15 offensive player.
Okay. Jokic.
Jokic is still number 1. Yep.
Shai's
still number 2.
Luka.
You're going this version of Luka number 3.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay.
I'm going to look at this version. Brunson in that 5th spot, Ben. Oh, I don't know what I would do with this one.
Would it be Halliburton?
I don't think so.
Would it would it be Giannis?
Maybe. I would
What about Mitchell? What about Mitchell?
I would think about Mitchell. I would think about Giannis. I don't know. Trae is interesting as like a singular offensive force, but I'm not so convinced.
I don't think so with Trae.
I have a top 4. I'm not even saying a 5th.
Okay. I think Jokic, Shai, Brunson for me would be there. I like Mitchell, Luka. This version of Luka you're higher on. This version of Luka is still in second gear to me. We have not seen the Luka yet. And maybe no, I was going to say Curry, but I think you need more infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
I think you need more infrastructure. Yeah. So, I don't know if LeBron can do that much heavy lifting, but Cody. LeBron has been ridiculously good. And we didn't talk about it, and it's going to get overstated by people who, there's a lot of them, don't like LeBron James and don't want to acknowledge that he's playing out of his mind at 40. But the passing and the playmaking and the decision-making are absurd. And it's not just with the ball. It's what I was alluding to earlier. It's go to the post, set this screen, run this angle, look for this inside switch. And, the Lakers offense isn't anything to write home about. They're not in the 120 offensive rating club. They're not a top 5 offense. They haven't been a top 5 offense in this run, but I think they've been a top 10 offense in this run, and they've been doing it with defensive personnel. Mm-hmm. And there's some shooting luck involved in helping them defensively and all that, but it doesn't matter to me because if you have Dorian Finney-Smith, Jared Vanderbilt, Jackson Hayes, even Rui Hachimura, and you have a ton of guys like that, Gabe Vincent, before this, Max Christie, before the trade, and you're still putting up like above average, really good league offense. And LeBron, maybe it's LeBron. I don't know. Do you want to do
their offense has been 2.5 points worse when he's on the court versus off?
don't even.
I care because it impacts the overall offensive rating of the team.
But in this case, we have such a larger sample. I went through this exact exercise with LeBron, and I think that's why people are going to say they're lower on LeBron. Go to 2018. Go to 2018, look at his on-off, look at the offensive numbers, and then tell me with a straight face that 2018 LeBron James is not a good offensive player. It's just a small sample blip with the on-off data to me that you have to contextualize. If you had it over a much larger sample, I would find it a lot more compelling.
They're 9.5 points better when he's on the court in 2018.
2018, isn't that the year?
This is the first year he has a negative.
Isn't 2018 the year he has a negative on-off?
No. Wait, are you talking full on-off or offensive on-off? I'm talking just offensively.
I'm talking his full on-off. Isn't 2018 the year?
According to play-by-play, there is no year besides this year.
What do you mean play-by-play?
PBP stats.
There's a year. Hold on a sec.
I'm looking.
Talking about great podcasting. Yeah, it's 2018.
What
2018. His on-off is plus 1.9.
I see plus 3.2.
Look, I'm just saying. There's a year where LeBron James. What's happening? There's a year where LeBron James has a terrible on-off. And I'm just saying that you have to, like, this is half a year. I'm not going to pay attention to noise like that. It's clearly noise. Clearly LeBron James in 2018 did not become a terrible player and then suddenly become a great player again.
There's a difference between like +3 and like -8 though, or negative.
No one's -8. Come on.
LeBron is -8 this year. I'm just saying. Listen,
what do you mean negative? Timeout? What are you talking about?
His play-by-play on-off for this year is -8. They're 8 points worse when he's on the court versus.
What are you talking about?
You want me to send you this link right now live? Do you want me to send this to the world?
Oh my God. Oh, maybe we should just end the show. What is happening?
Okay.
Sorry, you're saying LeBron James is on-off is -8 this year?
Yes, that is what I am saying.
Oh my God. Yeah. Okay. Do you have anything else to say before I get us out of here?
No, I need to go eat some food.
All right. That was fun. Thanks as always for listening all the way through. And as always, hope you're having a great day.